Some of the most terrifying places hide behind the flickering neon lights of roadside motels places where travelers check in, but may never truly check out. What is it about these transient shelters that makes shadows linger longer and the night feel alive with menace? Tonight, you will hear 3 true motel horror stories that reveal the sinister secrets lurking just beyond the door. The hum of the freeway blurred into the night as Mark's car pulled into the dusty, parking lot of the Horizon Motel. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned, but still bore a sign flickering dimly against the starless sky. He was tired, and after 17 hours on the road, all he wanted was a bed, a hot shower, and to shut his eyes. The lobby was dimly lit, kind of yellowish, cheap fluorescent lighting that made everything feel unreal. Mark approached the counter where a middle-aged woman sat staring blankly at a muted television set, her fingers idly tapping on the plastic chair's armrest. "One night, single room," Mark said, holding up his driver's license. She nodded without looking up and slid a key across the counter. Room 12. To reach it, Mark followed the narrow corridor lined with cracked wallpaper peeling at the edges. The stale scent of mildew and cheap air freshener pressed against his face as he found the door and fit the key in the lock. The hinges creaked, welcoming him with a sound like a long sigh. The room was small, with a bed that sagged in the middle, a bedside lamp glowing faintly, and a window overlooking the cracked asphalt parking lot. Mark set down his bags and reached for the light switch. The room plunged into darkness before the bulb glimmered into reluctant life. Just as the ceiling light stabilized, a feeling of being watched settled firmly in his chest. He told himself it was exhaustion. Drained, he switched on the television and flopped onto the bed. The static-filled screen flickered, and faint whispers could almost be heard beneath the channel's garbled noise. Then, the power cut out, plunging the room into pitch darkness. Panic skated a cold line down his spine. He reached for his phone, but the screen was dead, no signal. A multitude of tiny shadows seemed to press against the curtained window. Mark's breath quickened, his heartbeat roared in his ears. A soft knock sounded not from the door, but from the closet. His reluctance warred with curiosity, but the door creaked open before he could react. Inside was an old jacket, hanging limply, as if waiting for a passenger it never had. Mark stepped back. Suddenly, the phone on the bedside table buzzed vibrantly to life, an incoming call from unknown. He answered tentatively, breathing heavy. "Don't leave," a woman's voice whispered, trembling and distant. "They're still here." Before he could respond, the receiver cracked and went silent. The lamp flickered ominously. Then another knock, this time on the room's front door. Mark seized his jacket, heart hammering. The door shook under repeated pounding. "Who is it?" he managed to choke out. Only silence answered. The pounding stopped abruptly, replaced by a slow scraping sound. The motel seemed to be holding its breath. Mark glanced once more at the closet. There, between the jacket sleeves, a pale, ghostly hand slowly reached out. Frozen with dread, he realized he was no longer alone. The night had just begun, and something ancient, restless, was awake in room 12. Subscribe if you're brave enough to hear what happens next. Would you have stayed or fled? Let me know in the comments below. Claire had never expected her family road trip to become a nightmare. They stopped at a small roadside motel, nestled between dense trees, when the car sputtered its last breath. Tired and desperate, Claire and her family accepted the tired room with one double bed and a small adjoining bathroom, not knowing the terror waiting in the walls. That first night, the night air was thick and heavy, muffling the cicadas' song. Claire was awakened by a faint scratching sound just outside the door. At first, she thought it might be a small animal, but the noise grew more persistent, deliberate even. Her husband, Mike, muttered grudgingly that it was probably just raccoons, but Claire felt something else's attention gnawing at the edges of her mind. Later, when the family tried to settle back down, the TV crackled and flashed with static. Then a shadow flickered on the wall, a dark shape, distinct from any natural light. Her little daughter, Sophie, clutched Claire's arm with wide eyes. "Mommy, the man in the window is smiling," she whispered. Claire hurried to the window, but saw nothing plus only the thick darkness and their neighbors' shuttered rooms. And next morning revealed more unsettling details. Mike found strange symbols etched faintly in the dirt near the back exit. Barely visible, but unmistakably deliberate, a twisted combination of lines curving into a sigil no one recognized. The motel clerk, a pale man who seemed to have emerged straight from the shadows, warned them not to wander after dark. Against their better judgment, the family decided to stay just one more night, hoping their car would be fixed by morning. But when darkness fell again, low whispers filled the thin walls, echoing voices speaking in languages long forgotten. Sophie started to cry, saying the shadows were coming to hug her, calling her to join them. Mike tried to comfort her, but a chilling breeze swept through the room, extinguishing all candles and lights. Suddenly, the bathroom door slammed shut by itself, trapping Mike inside. Through the thin door, he heard whispers encouraging him to let go, to stay forever. Claire frantically tried the handle, but it was locked tight. Outside, the floorboards creaked, slow and deliberate steps pacing, circling the room. Then silence. Mike was gone when they finally forced the door open. No sign of him, no indication where he could have gone. The family fled at dawn, leaving their belongings behind, hearts shattered and minds scarred by the motel's invisible prison. It wasn't until years later that Claire saw a tattered brochure in a bookstore, advertising the very motel, calling it a restful place. Inside, a note scribbled in pencil read, "Some rooms have no checkout." The motel was gone soon after, demolished to make way for a shopping center. Yet locals still whisper about nights when you can hear faint cries carried on the wind, or a lament from those who never left. How far would you go to save someone trapped in the unknown? The next story will chill you deeper. Jacob was a photographer, chasing the promise of eerie Americanated motels, forgotten diners, sunsets bleeding through rusted signs. One isolated motel, famed for its vintage neon sign flickering in defiance of dilapidation, became his latest obsession. He arrived just as twilight descended, the pink and orange sky deepening into bruised indigo. The air smelled of dust and gasoline, a faint metallic tang that Jacob found unsettling but fitting. He rented the solitary room available number 7, with its peeling wallpaper patterned with 70s florals. Jacob set up his camera gear, intending to capture its perfect decay in the midnight hour. As darkness folded over the horizon, a strange chill snaked under the door cracks and edges of the window frame. The motel, though silent, seemed to breathe around him, an unseen presence pulsing just beneath the surface. The night deepened, and Jacob's camera suddenly blinked with a low battery warning despite being fully charged earlier. Shrugging it off, he stepped outside to catch the neon sign's artificial glow. From the corner of his eye, a figure lurked beyond the perking lotus silhouette, so still it was almost a trick of light. When he focused, it was gone. Back inside, his camera let out a soft beep. New photos were saved, ones he had not taken. Reviewing the images, Jacob's blood ran cold. Dark shapes with vague, distorted faces peered closer in the pictures, eyes gleaming with sorrow and menace. On the last photo, a figure stood at his room's doorway, a gaunt man with sunken eyes and a faint, knowing smile. Heart pounding, Jacob tried to open the door. Locked. Not from the outside. It was stuck as if held by an invisible grip. The temperature dropped sharply. The old television flickered on without command, static swirling before a faint face emerged on the screen, a whispered voice calling his name, soft but urgent. Jacob pounded on the door, begging for release. The motel had become a cage, and he was the newest prisoner. Outside, the faded sign sputtered and sparked, casting grotesque shadows that danced and twisted. Hours passed, and no one answered his screams. Morning's first light finally pried the door loose. Jacob stumbled out, pale and shaken, clutching his camera. When he checked the remaining photos, the screens were blank except for one final picture showing an empty room, except a single handprint smeared on the wall, just below the peeling wallpaper. The motel vanished from all maps overnight, but in online forums, people share similar tales. Some swear the place traps lost souls in endless twilight. What would you do if a place refused to let you leave? Only one story remains. Brace yourself. Emily's plan was simple. A weekend getaway at a quaint motel she'd found in the outskirts of town, recommended by a friend for its charm and affordability. The motel had old-world charm, with ivy crawling up its faded walls and a gravel driveway that crunched under her tires as she arrived. Inside, the scent of aged wood and lavender hung faintly in the air. Her room, number 9, had a large window overlooking a small garden maze, whose paths twisted like a living puzzle when the moonlight hit just right. The first night passed uneventfully, but Emily awoke before dawn to a cold draft sweeping through the room. She noticed the window slightly ajar, though she was certain she'd closed it. Drawing the curtain back, her eyes caught a figure at the edge of the garden Mizian old man, barely visible, standing so still it was like he was a statue rooted in the mist. When she blinked, he was gone. The next day, Emily explored the small town, but kept thinking about the figure. When she asked the receptionist about the garden maze, a shadow flickered across his face. "Old Mr. Holloway," he said quietly. "He lived there once. Some say he never really left." That night, Emily awoke again, this time to the sound of soft footsteps pacing just outside her door. The doorknob rattled slightly as she held her breath. A scratch on the wood, where nails could have been, and a faint whisper that sounded like a name ... hers. Heart pounding, she grabbed the lamp and switched it on, illuminating the room in stark, revealing light. The footsteps stopped, but when she checked under the bed and behind the curtains, nothing was there. She locked the door and pressed herself against it, sliding down to the floor. Outside the window, the garden maze shadows seemed to ripple, forming shapes that shifted and morphed, sometimes human, sometimes something else. At midnight, she heard creeping whispers again, this time accompanied by a soft humming, eerily sweet, that seemed to call her into the maze. Unable to resist, drawn by something deeper than fear or curiosity, Emily stepped outside. The cold night air bit her skin, and the gravel crunched beneath her as she entered the maze. With every turn, the humming grew louder, an irresistible lure in the silence. Suddenly, she found herself facing a stone statue of a man with hollow eyes, clutching a weathered key. She reached out and took it. The maze twisted, paths shifting eerily, as if alive. The key felt cold, heavier than iron. Then, a voice spoke from the shadows. "To leave, you must unlock what binds you." Emily frantically looked around, realizing she was trapped in a puzzle, far more sinister than a garden labyrinth. As the maze's walls crept closer, the humming became a chorus of voices, chanting her name with promise and menace. Could she escape before dawn, or would she become another secret held by the old motel and its ghostly guardian? Ben was a skeptic who never believed in haunted places, but the Pine Hollow Motel changed that in ways he never expected. Working late to finish a project, he chose the motel for its isolation and cheap rates. The sign creaked above the entrance, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The room was basic: a narrow bed, a desk, and a lamp emitting a weak orange glow. He unpacked his laptop and settled in, dismissing the odd chill that settled even with the heater on. Around midnight, Ben heard faint tapping on the window. At first, he assumed it was rain, but looking out, the sky was clear, stars twinkling coldly. The source of the tapping? Nothing visible. The noise grew, rhythmic and insistent, like fingers drumming a slow, deliberate beat. Then came the scratching not on the window, but on the thin walls. Unease crept over him as whispers threaded through the air, barely audible but persistent. His phone screen flickered, displaying a text from an unknown number. "You can never leave." Ben laughed it off nervously, but the lights suddenly dimmed, plunging the room into uneasy half-darkness. Shadows lengthened, twisting across walls into shapes that made his skin crawl. As he tried to call the front desk, his line was dead. Then came the smell something rotten, metallic, close and choking. Fear sharpened his senses. He noticed a small, faded photograph under the lamp, a family portrait with faces scratched out, except one. The man's eyes in the photo seemed alive, burning with a cold fire that bore into Ben's soul. The lamp flickered and exploded in a shower of sparks, and the room went utterly dark. Panic gripped him as cold fingers brushed his neck, and a voice breathed directly into his ear. "Stay forever." Ben barricaded the door with the desk, his thoughts racing. The scratching increased, accompanied by low, guttural moans from beneath the floorboards. His laptop linked back to life, displaying a file he did not open. Against his better judgment, he clicked it open. Screaming erupted from the speaker snut from any human source, but layered, agonizing wails intertwined with whispered pleas for mercy. The noise overwhelmed him, forcing him to cover his ears as cold breath brushed his face. The knocking came again, louder, more urgent. Ben's heart pounded. Suddenly, the door creaked open slowly on its own. In the hallway stood a figure, obscured by shadows, its eyes glinting with a malevolent hunger. The room plunged into silence as the figure stepped forward. Ben's breath stuck in his throat. Was this the end? Or was there a way out? Don't forget to subscribe for the final reveal. What would you have done if faced with a presence stronger than fear? The final story belongs to Sarah, a young woman who had heard the warnings but ignored them in the quest for solitude. She booked a room at the Blackwood Motel, infamous among locals for its grim history, yet oddly cheap rates. Arriving under a leaden sky, she was drawn to the motel's lonely charm, unaware it was a trap as old as the cracked foundation beneath her feet. Room 13 was her room most would avoid. The key was heavy and cold in her hand. Inside, the air was stale, punctuated by faint echoous footsteps that were not hers, doors clicking shut with unseen movement. Choosing to dismiss the unease, Sarah unpacked, but shadows clung to the corners of the room, dark and unyielding. As night deepened, she heard a slow tapping on the wall behind the bed. At first rhythmic, then erratic, as if something pounded from the other side, desperate to break through. Sarah pressed her ear against the wall, but heard nothing beyond a low, choking gasp. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The room was swallowed by darkness, so complete it seemed tangible. Sarah reached for her phone, but the screen remained black, drained of power, inexplicably. The tapping returned closer this time, with a sinister urgency. Then a voice, a low, grating whisper that slithered across the black. "Join us." Panic and curiosity warred inside her. Gathering courage, Sarah slid the bed away from the wall. Behind it was not just plaster, but a hidden door, swollen with age, held closed by rusty hinges. The whispering grew louder, pleading, agonized. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into inky darkness. Hesitating only briefly, Sarah stepped down, each creak of the wooden steps echoing like a scream through the quiet motel halls above. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of earth and decay. At the bottom, a small chamber illuminated by flickering candlelight revealed walls lined with photograph cases, of people who had stayed here long ago, eyes scratched out, names faded. A cold wind swept across the room, extinguishing all flames. In the darkness, hands reached out from the shadows, cold and insistent. Sarah's scream was swallowed, lost to the endless night. Outside, the Blackwood Motel stood silent, its secrets safe for now. 3 true stories, woven from the silent screams of motels where the night refuses to end. What would you do if the place you checked into was where you checked out? Of life, your next road trip might just require more than a reservation.